Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mike Clegg, Dean of the School of Public Health, and I wanted to just welcome you all to this great session that we're going to have this afternoon. Talking about gun violence to this audience is like carrying coals to Newcastle, but let me just say a few things. I mean, it's obviously it's on all our minds, and it's something that when we watch the news in Baltimore, we see evidence of the havoc that's wreaked by firearms. But it's especially important because it's a leading cause of death for young people and is the second leading contributor to racial disparities in life expectancy among men in the U.S. So it has a huge impact. I'm really proud of the work that our faculty do in this area. It's a tough issue to for us being a school where faculty have to raise their own salaries through grants and contracts. This is an especially difficult space to be in because it's almost impossible to get external funding to do that. But they have persevered and made great contributions. We strive to advance public health and live up to our motto of protecting health, saving lives, millions at a time. And we do that by doing the things we do best. We train the next generation of leaders, we create evidence, and we take that evidence and make policy and practice, and vice versa. What we learn from doing public health practice informs the kind of research that we should do. And the center is really an exemplary example of that. We're really honored that we've assembled key leaders and experts here to share their insights on the challenges and opportunities that are relevant to enforcing Maryland gun laws. I know that Attorney General-elect Brian Frosh is here. We have Captain Dalaine Brady from the Maryland State Police, Kathleen Campbell with the Maryland Attorney General's Office, and Lauren Baraldi with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. Also joining us today are several other individuals from the Baltimore Police Department, including Commissioner Anthony Batts, the state's attorney's office, and others from the Maryland State Police. I'd now like to introduce Daniel Webster. I think you probably all know Daniel. He directs the Center for Gun Policy and Research, serves as Deputy Director for the Center for the Prevention of Youth Violence, and is a professor in our Department of Health Policy and Management here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. He teaches courses on violence prevention and research methods for health policy. In fact, this is part of a course here today. He's co-editor and a contributor to Reducing Gun Violence in America, Informing Policy with Evidence and Analysis. It's really a remarkable book. So with the massacre in Connecticut, I guess 2 years ago, within 30 days we held an international conference here at the school, and through the leadership of Daniel, Jan Vernick, Steve Terrett, and others, produced a book within 8 days after that conference. And that book was then placed on the desk of every staffer in the Maryland state government and the federal government to inform them about state-of-the-art insights about policy and prevention of gun violence. I think it had a big effect here in Maryland. Didn't have the effect that we would have liked on the national level, but is one step closer to having rational gun policy. Daniel's an internationally recognized expert on the prevention of gun violence, and his research has really helped illuminate the efforts of lawmakers, law enforcement, public health, and community organizations. So please join me in thanking Daniel for the work that he does and in welcoming him to the podium. So Daniel. See you later. Good.
Oh, good afternoon. This is really an exciting day for me, and I'm so thankful to have this kind of turnout and to be able to present the kind of speakers with the expertise so critical for addressing, as the Dean Clegg said, one of our most pressing public health problems that we've been working on here for many years at Johns Hopkins in partnership with many others. This is because I'm a very busy person and trying to do many things. This seminar kind of brings all of that together. I can both teach, I can do the practice and policy part of my work, and I can talk about my research. So I couldn't be happier. I'm going to lead off the discussion today with a quick overview about some key Maryland laws that are designed to keep guns from dangerous people, and give you a little bit of the research of what we know about the effects of those, more generally about those laws, and discuss some both challenges and opportunities that we have to use those laws to the greatest effect to prevent gun violence in Maryland. And then invite our guest speakers who have an enormous amount of experience and expertise to inform this discussion from their professional standpoint. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments from others. What do we know about how criminals get guns? I wish we knew a lot more. We should know a lot more. One thing we have is a national survey of inmates in state prisons. The last data that was collected from that group dates back now a decade ago. But when criminals who use guns in crime were asked how they got their guns, the most common responses were from a friend or a family member or some sort of street or underground market source, as you can see in this pie chart. So that represents almost, not quite 80% of times or ways in which criminals acquired guns. Theft accounts for about 10% of those gun acquisitions, and 6% from illegal transactions involving licensed gun dealers. Just finding out very directly how criminals get guns doesn't show you the whole picture, particularly because so many acquire them through that underground market source. So another way to look at data to better understand this whole problem is to look at gun trafficking investigations. So there was a report that the ATF put out in the year 2000 looking at a large number of gun trafficking investigations. And the three main sort of channels or conduits that they identified of guns getting to criminals were, first, corrupt licensed gun dealers; secondly, straw purchasers, sometimes in collusion with those corrupt gun dealers; and what you could think of as unlicensed sellers. These are individuals selling a lot of firearms, but not being licensed dealers and going through the regulatory procedures that licensed dealers have to. So that was some time ago. I'm sure this information would look a little bit different if we did it today. Probably one of the biggest changes is, of course, internet. That's how we buy and sell everything these days. But there is some signs that risky things are going on in the internet. There's been reports looking at one of the most common sites, Arms List, and nearly a third of the private sellers on that website are selling more than 30 guns a year, which depends on how you interpret it, may actually mean that they are truly in the business of selling guns and perhaps should be licensed. Another study looking at the internet data for individuals who were placing ads saying they wanted to purchase guns and even left a phone number for their contact. Researchers use that to also identify those individuals and look at criminal histories, and found that at least 1 in 30 were prohibited. So it is becoming a concern. What laws does Maryland have to try to reduce diversions of guns to criminals? Well, I'm proud to say that we have several, and I'll go through them quickly here. One is what you hear a lot about, of course, is universal background checks. So not just for gun sales by licensed dealers, but from private transactions as well. We also, as part of the Gun Safety Act of 2013, instituted a very important policy of handgun purchaser licensing with fingerprint verification of the identity of the applicant. As part of that law, there was also requirements that gun owners, if their guns are lost or stolen, must report those that lost or theft promptly to law enforcement. This is important because in follow-up investigations of guns diverted to criminals, many individuals connected with those guns say that they were lost or stolen, but never bothered to report them to law enforcement. We also, again, as part of the Gun Safety Act, strengthened the regulations that we have over licensed gun dealers. So now we have a lot of tools at the disposal of the state police, and Captain Brady will talk a little bit more about that when she speaks. We also, effective January 1, 1990, banned Saturday night specials or junk guns, something that in all of these policies that I've mentioned, there are one or more studies showing that they are associated with less diversions of guns to criminals. In the case of the Maryland Saturday night special ban, we also have evidence of reductions in homicides as well. There are other relevant laws that we have in place in Maryland. We have relatively high standards for legal gun ownership, which is one important tool. We also have a registry for individuals who have purchased handguns in Maryland that can be used, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. We specifically outlaw straw purchase, someone buying a gun for someone else. We have one gun a month restrictions for handguns. And also importantly, because again, theft is one channel in which criminals obtain guns, we do have laws requiring gun owners to store their guns locked away safely in the presence of children. What do we know about law enforcement? What can they do? There's not a lot of studies on this. One very important one was published in 2005 that looked at a multi-agency initiative to address illegal gun trafficking that was supplying criminals in the Boston area. Multi-agency, local, state, federal initiative that attacked basically those key conduits that I mentioned before of guns to criminals. Braga and Pierce documented a very substantial reduction in diversion of guns to criminals following this initiative. As part of the study that I conducted with my colleague Jan Vernick, we looked at a variety of state policies and their associations with gun diversions. One of the most interesting findings and unique part of the data we collected is we collected not only what laws were available to regulate gun dealers, but whether law enforcement is actually using them, whether they did regular compliance inspections. We found that having the laws by themselves had no relationship to diversions of guns to criminals. It was only when law enforcement was actually using those on a regular basis with inspections. We've conducted a couple of studies showing that undercover stings of gun stores that are selling a lot of guns that end up in the hands of criminals, catching them making illegal straw sales, that those initiatives have led to very significant reductions in the diversion of guns to criminals. 62% in Chicago, 36% in Detroit, and a really astounding 82% in the case of gun dealers who were targeted by New York City. These were out-of-state dealers. I mentioned handgun purchaser licensing as an effective tool. Recent research that we've done looked at a case when Missouri repealed its law of this type so that there was no background checks for private sales, nor did individuals have to interface directly with law enforcement. They simply went to the individual who was selling the gun directly. And what we found was really quite astounding. I'm not going to go through all the details of each of these bars, but these are indicators of a very short time period between a sale and a gun being used in crime. We saw basically a twofold increase in these indicators of diversion associated with the change in the policy in Missouri. We also found that the share of guns being used by criminals that had originated from within the state as opposed to out of state also increased quite abruptly and dramatically. Importantly, we found a really large effect on murders. The yellow line here shows you the murder rate for Missouri, and you see that it goes up significantly just after the law is repealed. At the same time, the U.S. rate is going in the opposite direction. We did a number of statistical analysis to control for a range of potential confounders. And our estimates were that the repeal of this law increased firearm homicides by 25% with no change in non-firearm homicide rates. Over an extended period of time, the murder rate increased by 14%. And it's worth noting that there were no increases in any of the states surrounding Missouri over that same time period. We've just completed analyses looking at a very similar law adopted in Connecticut in 1995 and associate a 40% lower rate of gun-related homicides associated with that policy, with no change in homicides committed by other means. Another sort of example about what law enforcement can do, of course, is to disarm people who are prohibited. A case study from a research project that my colleague Shannon Frateroli and Garen Wintermute and others were involved in California looked at a case of 2 counties that proactively took steps to disarm individuals with domestic violence restraining orders. Using a variety of methods, including their handgun registry, they were able to recover firearms from hundreds of prohibited persons with histories of violence. And our surveys of victims showed a much greater sense of safety and satisfaction with the process as a result. What are some of the challenges that we face? We have a lot of good laws on the books, and that's great, and we have a lot of expertise. What are some of the challenges? I think probably number one, in my opinion, would be how our current law is structured for requiring background checks for private handgun sales. The standards for convicting someone for not obeying that law are relatively high. That'll be discussed here soon, as well as not particularly strong penalties if you're able to convict someone. Another potential challenge is whether there will be any political will to strengthen this particular law, key law in preventing diversions of guns to criminals. But there are many opportunities, as I've noted, with the Gun Safety Act of 2013 and many of its provisions, with stronger tools for state police to make sure that dealers comply with state gun laws, lost and stolen reporting, as well as, of course, the permit to purchase system for handgun purchasers. I think it's worth noting, even though the guns are a very political issue, that when it comes to, based on polling that we have done on a variety of gun policies, we see very, very strong support that is bipartisan for strong enforcement of laws to keep guns from criminals. On the domestic violence side of things, we have a lethality assessment program in nearly every jurisdiction in the state of Maryland, where law enforcement are routinely asking victims not only of a range of questions about their rate of danger, but very specifically about firearms, and that gives them tools to then take action when someone is prohibited to make sure that the guns are removed. We have the registry, as I mentioned before, that it should be easy to identify. Right now, today, there are individuals who legally purchased handguns, subsequently were convicted of various crimes that prohibit them from possessing those firearms. We have the tools today to take action and disarm those individuals and charge them. And then finally, colleagues and I are undertaking a new study here to study Baltimore's underground gun market, and we hope that can inform this process as well. So that's my spiel. Now I want to invite our panel to come up, and you can turn off the slides now so that we aren't blinding our guest speakers. And what I would like to do is ask our speakers to come up and come up to the panel for the table here, and then I will introduce each one as it is their turn to speak. So if I could ask the speakers, thank you. So probably should have told Captain Brady to not sit down because I'm about to introduce her, but just very briefly, Captain Dalaine Brady has served with Maryland State Police for over 20 years, and during that time assumed a number of leadership positions. Importantly for today's discussion, she's been the chief of Maryland's State Police's licensing division that oversees efforts to promote compliance with a number of important firearms regulations. And so I'm so pleased that you're with us here today, Captain Brady. It's all yours.
Thanks. Oh, well, that was quick. Thank you very much. I apologize in advance. I very rarely have written remarks. I typically do a lot of teaching and pretty interactive type of presentations, but these are prepared remarks. I wasn't quite sure what the audience would look like. So if it's a little rudimentary or easy button-ish, I apologize in advance. But after watching the slideshow, I think I should get an A. But you guys tell me, okay? Maryland State Police Licensing Division is the regulatory body responsible for administering the provisions of both the Annotated Code of Maryland and the Code of Maryland regulations as they relate to the buying, selling, transfer, transportation, licensing, and registration of regulated firearms. Maryland's gun laws are designed to require responsible gun ownership and provides law enforcement with many opportunities to keep guns out of the hands of prohibited persons. More often than not, prohibited persons are generally those people that are prohibited from possessing firearms because they have a disqualifying criminal record, they suffer from mental illness, and or are addicted to drugs and alcohol. The most recent opportunity afforded law enforcement to keep guns out of the hands of prohibited persons were already discussed. That was that pre-qualification license. And in Maryland, it's called the handgun qualification license. The handgun qualification license is a product of what you'll hear me talk about a lot is the 2013 Firearms Safety Act. And it requires that in this state, unless you are otherwise exempt, as of October 1st of last year, a Maryland resident must possess this pre-qualification license before he or she may purchase a regulated firearm. Among other things, the application requires that the applicant attest under the penalties of perjury that he or she is not prohibited from possessing, according to either state or federal law, a handgun, and they must also show proof that in our state they have successfully completed an approved firearms safety training course. As already stated in the PowerPoint, this is a fingerprint-supported license. And what that means is during the course of the 10-year license, and it is a 10-year license, should an applicant or a license holder be subsequently arrested and convicted of a disqualifying prohibiting offense, the state police is notified automatically and the firearms are removed from the holder's possession. Since its passage, the Maryland State Police has issued 19,343, and we do more and more every day, of these handgun qualification licenses, and we have disapproved 212 people who have asked to receive the license but would have been disqualified from possessing a firearm. Another opportunity afforded to law enforcement to keep guns out of the hands of prohibited persons has been on our books and available to us for many years. Since 1998, Maryland has acted as a partial point of contact for the state and conducts national instant criminal background checks on purchase of handguns and assault-style rifles, long guns, they're regulated in the state. And they're also required to have an application sent to the state police. Maryland law stipulates that any person before the purchase of or rent or transfer of a regulated firearm, including individuals acquiring them from a dealer, a private sale, or as a gift, submits the application and comply with a 7-day waiting period. The 7-day waiting period, when it was passed, was intended to be a cooling off period. And it was provided for someone so that they did not, in a fit of rage, immediately gain access to a regulated firearm and commit a crime that they would probably have issues with the rest of their life. During the 7-day period, the Maryland State Police Licensing Division is responsible for conducting a thorough background investigation, and that includes the direct query of no less than 16 databases. Up until this year, that was a manual check of 16 databases. So if you can imagine signing on to the MVA, looking at a record and signing off, signing on to the FBI, looking at the record and signing off, 16 times individual databases, a single person. How many people have 2 computer screens? Do it on 1 computer screen. It's a sign on, a sign off. The records that we check include, they're not limited to, but they do include criminal history records, felony convictions, warrants, records of protective orders, convictions for misdemeanors, including domestic violence and stalking, drug arrests, convictions, record of mental health adjudications, and recently private and public involuntary commitments to mental health facilities. This year alone, there have been 27,982 regulated firearms transferred to 278, notice he's right, left statistics, 278 disapproved, so 278 of those 27,000 were disqualified. Last year, anybody want to guess? What was last year? 27,000 this year. How much is that? Swag it. 129,900. Isn't that incredible? Okay. And of those 1,125, we were very busy last year, by the way. 1,125 applications were disapproved. So the number was 129,516. That's how many transactions we did last year. And I am committed to collecting $10 for every one of those. Does everybody hear me? Okay, so 2013 does mark an unprecedented year for the division. Panicked buying created the submission of applications requiring investigations that the department, it truly exceeded our ability. With aid from our law enforcement partners and our criminal justice partners, we were able to investigate every single one of those. And in the end, 368 firearms were released to 348 prohibited persons. And because of the man sitting next to my right, I proudly report that every one of those guns have been recovered. The challenge to ensuring that prohibited persons do not get firearms is ensuring that the most accurate and timely criminal information is provided to state and federal databases. Sharing complete, accurate, and timely information is recognized and remains a priority for the state of Maryland. Statewide, lawmakers and citizens are committed to protecting the integrity of criminal history information and improving the state's information infrastructure, systems, and policies. As of May of 2014, there were approximately 130,000 Maryland arrests that had missing dispositions in the state database. So for the HQL, I can only disapprove if they've been convicted of a disqualifying offense, not if they've simply been arrested. On the other side, I can disapprove the receipt of a weapon if they have been arrested. So you understand what a missing disposition means to me with making an informed decision. With funding and assistance from the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention, 20,000 of those dispositions have since been recovered and are expected to be updated in the database by the end of this year. Recently, Maryland has implemented a pilot project that seeks to install live scan machines at the electronic fingerprinting in our courthouses. The installation of this equipment will allow fingerprinting to be completed immediately after a defendant is convicted of a crime. This will reduce missing case dispositions and allow for summonses, citations, and indictments to be visible on criminal history queries. He just said I'm doing a great job. Another opportunity recently provided to law enforcement to help keep guns out of the hands of prohibited persons is Maryland's new resident gun registration mandate, a provision of the Firearms Safety Act. It requires every person who moves into the state of Maryland with intent on becoming a resident to register all regulated firearms with the Secretary within 90 days from establishing residency. The registration system is completely automated and available on the department's website. To date, 398 new Maryland residents have registered more than 450 regulated firearms. Some were determined to be prohibited from possessing firearms. And with the assistance of Sergeant Lopez and his group, these residents have been properly informed and those weapons have been removed from their possession. One challenge to the division for the enforcement of the new resident, as you may know, there's nobody at our border saying, welcome to the state of Maryland, please register your handguns. However, community outreach, social media, and my final point, properly informed and educated gun dealers are the key to the successful implementation of this provision. So I am closing up, and finally I'm going to talk a little bit about what you saw on your PowerPoints, Maryland's firearms dealers. Maryland's gun laws provide law enforcement with many opportunities in this regard, and that is to license gun dealers, to conduct the background checks before these people get their licenses. We can audit both their inventories and their records, and we have the power to fine, suspend, and revoke the license. The Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence in an article last year correctly noted that gun dealers represent a critical link between gun manufacturers and distributors and the general public. Currently, Maryland has 302 licensed firearms dealers. That's state license. That's not FFLs. There are more than 3,000 FFLs in the state of Maryland. All have undergone comprehensive background investigations, dealer orientation, and annually the department does conduct training and seminars to educate and inform the dealers of the changes of laws and regulations. I am a firm believer that it is education and a partnership with these dealers that is going to help them, help us be the eyes at the point of sale. It is, inspection is extremely important, but they have to know that we support them, and we do. Accounting for gun inventories is and remains a top priority of the licensing division. Missing and stolen guns pose a serious risk to public safety, as it is certainly these guns that will become crime guns. Maryland law requires the department to inspect the records of every state licensed dealer once every 2 years. Since January, we've conducted 126 of our 302. We have documented violations that do include inventory discrepancies, failures to complete background checks, and improperly fill out forms and records. The challenge to the division, as well as our federal partners, is and continues to be the ratio of qualified resources versus the ability to conduct 100%, not sample audits, but 100% of their inventory. And in closing, the Maryland State Police is proud to enforce Maryland's gun laws and is committed to being the statewide force for a safe and secure Maryland.
Thank you, Captain. Very impressive. Really impressed how much your unit accomplished, particularly during the challenging circumstances of last year. I want to now introduce Kathleen Campbell, who's an Assistant Attorney General in the Office of the Maryland Attorney General, where she's been since 2012. Part of her time there, she headed the Firearms Trafficking Unit, and before that, before coming to the Maryland Attorney General's office, she served as an Assistant State's Attorney for Montgomery County, Maryland. She's a graduate of the University of Maryland's Francis King Carey School of Law.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Captain Brady. That was fantastic to explain what we do. I work closely with the Maryland State Police both in their gun unit and their fire enforcement unit. I am with the Attorney General's office, and the Firearms Trafficking Unit consists of 1 prosecutor and 3 full-time investigators charged with making sure that prohibited persons cannot possess regulated firearms. In order to do that, we get assistance from the Maryland State Police. Every time someone is disapproved, those disapprovals come straight to our investigators and they investigate them. They make sure that they do not have the gun. If they have the gun, they work closely with the state police to get that gun back immediately. And they also look at different ways to find out if they're not just trying to purchase guns. Is it someone who has been approved to have a gun but picked up a new offense? They check the Maryland Sex Offender Registry. They check protective orders to make sure that people who are respondents and protective orders don't have their firearms. They check pawn shops. Some of the gun stores have in the past given lists of people who are actively using the firing range. We check and see if those people are prohibited. In a year, we take away with the Maryland State Police, about 1,000 guns from prohibited persons. As the prosecutor in the unit, it's my job to take these cases to court. Primarily, my cases involve prohibited persons who are false applications, people who are trying to get firearms by going to a store and purchasing. They do 3 things. They give false information on this application required by law. They also commit perjury, and they're attempting to possess a firearm, being prohibited. And in the last year, several people have actually gotten those firearms, and we've got the firearms back and prosecuted them for that. Now, these cases have many challenges. Factually, they're difficult. You have people going into gun stores and buying guns, and the first thing a defense attorney will say is, well, he's trying to buy a gun legally. He wouldn't do that. They are sometimes observed as paper crimes because I have an application, I have a person from the store, and I have a trooper come in to explain what happened, but I don't have any victims that bleed, or I don't have anyone fleeing and eluding a scene that a lot of people are used to. And they immediately give the guns back. And that is because of the great work of the Maryland State Police, because when they call you, they say, you have to give this gun back now or we're coming to get it. It is very serious. And they're taken seriously. But factually, those can be difficult because they cut both ways. Legally, in the state of Maryland, you have to prove that they knowingly committed these offenses, and it's a very high burden. It's a specific intent crime. So they have to know why they're prohibited and that they're, by doing these things, they're specifically knowing they're prohibited and they're trying to get the gun. That's the result of a decision of our Court of Appeals. And we deal with it on an everyday basis. Every single case I have had, without a doubt, the first thing that I hear is they didn't know. And most of the cases, when they do go to trial, and there are very few that go to trial because we have such a great unit that puts together, so the cases are wonderful, they're very strong. However, when they do go to trial, the defendant will almost without a doubt testify and say, I didn't know. And we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they did know. And it can be difficult. And jurisdictionally, it can be difficult because depending on where you are in the state of Maryland, judges and juries feel very differently about their guns. So you can have some juries are very supportive of the gun laws and they understand them, and other juries really don't take this seriously. They think, well, they don't feel strongly enough about the laws in some cases. And they've told me that that's kind of the problems that some of the jurors have had. And the other problem is they don't know that he knew. I couldn't see in his head, one juror told me about the case. So they can be difficult. So one judge, when we finished, the defendant pled guilty. He had a prior for a felony auto theft. And during sentencing, the judge apologized that he couldn't give the family guns back to him. But he is prohibited. In each and every case, I will also remind the judge that as a result of the convictions, if they get the conviction, that as opposed to probation before judgment, they are prohibited and they stand prohibited in the state of Maryland. I think it would be helpful if in every case where there's a conviction that is a prohibiting conviction, that a judge would tell a defendant at sentencing. And I don't see that happening in courtrooms across the state regularly, and I think that it should. That would be one of the biggest tweaks that I would make. I would think that the judges, when they are giving a sentence out, they will then put on the record. Because when we have cases and we bring them to court, and if it's a protective order, I usually have the record of a judge explaining, you are prohibited, you may not have a gun. If you have any guns, you need to give them up now. They sign papers to that effect. It's very persuasive evidence to a judge. He was told, he signed a form. There's no way he didn't understand he can't get a gun, and yet he went and applied for a gun. It would be helpful to have that information at the time of every sentencing that's a prohibiting offense. Our cases are very important, particularly I feel strongly about the protective order cases, and we've had some great convictions where they get we have had one individual in the last 2 years, he was convicted of giving the false information. Subsequently, he went out. Well, he was convicted of giving it because there was a protective order against him. He was convicted in Prince George's County. After that conviction, he went down to, I believe it's Worcester, and started harassing his neighbor, and he became obsessed with her. And he's subsequently charged with violating my probation. And right now, he is being held. In the meantime, he has been evaluated for mental health problems, and he is being held. But we have our probation to hold him to in addition to the new charges. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lauren Baraldi, who is Assistant District Attorney for Philadelphia, where she's been in that office since 2003. Since 2010, she's held several leadership positions in the Philadelphia DA's office, and currently is chief of the Gun Violence Task Force, a unit that has successfully prosecuted hundreds of straw purchasers. She received her law degree from Widener School of Law in 2003 and is also a graduate of Mount St. Mary's University.
So the Gun Violence Task Force is comprised of 4
local prosecutors from the Philadelphia DA's office, and we have the privilege of working with 18 agents from the state's Attorney General's office, in addition to a partnership with the Philadelphia Police Department. We receive our funding, it's a line item in the state's Attorney General's budget, which funds all of this, in addition to overtime and ballistics and everything else. So we are a very well-oiled machine.
Take a note, sir, on that one.
All of we have 18 agents, 3 supervisors. All 18 of those agents are retired homicide detectives from Philadelphia. So to say that we have an unbelievable amount of investigative experience would be an understatement of the people that I get to work with. But I think it's important for me just to describe how you buy a gun in Pennsylvania, because it's a little bit different probably than how you purchase a gun in Maryland, which then will dictate the rest of what I have to say. So there's 4 ways you can do it. You go into a gun store to buy a gun. You can go to a gun show to buy a gun. You can go to the internet to buy a gun, or you could have a private sale. So 3 of those 4 require an instant background check. It's called PICS. It's Pennsylvania Instant Check System, whereby pick up the phone, they call after the person fills out the paperwork saying that they've never been convicted of a crime, where the sentence could exceed 1 year imprisonment. But there's also a caveat there that just because you weren't sentenced to the year in prison doesn't mean that you are allowed to purchase. You could have received probation. Conviction is the key. They get immediate response over the phone, whether the person is approved or denied. If it is a hold, and sometimes it is a hold, and usually that's for purposes of your mental health issues and getting those records clear, they then have 14 days to respond. The people don't actually receive the gun for 48 hours later, but they are instantaneously told whether they are approved or rejected. So some of the cases we prosecute are what we call the PICS denials, which is similar to what Kat was describing. And we do not have the specific intent issue that you have here in Maryland. We don't. We get these forms. They have filled out a state form and a federal form, both of which specifies that you are not allowed to purchase if you have such and such conviction. Our agents go to someone's house and literally ask them, is this their signature? That's the only question they ask them. They say yes, and that's our case. These are pleas for us, and these are felony pleas for us because PICS denials in Pennsylvania are F3 crimes. The other type of crime that the task force works on is what's called the straw purchases. So I'm sure most people in this room understand what a straw purchase is, but just for a couple of you that may not, is that you go into a gun store and you buy a gun for somebody who isn't allowed to have one. So you're not allowed to have one because you're convicted. You're not allowed to have one because you were what we call 302'd in a state institution. You aren't allowed to have one because you're 18 years old. So how do we get this information? We have a very good relationship with the gun store owners in Philadelphia. But we have also been in existence for going on 8 years now. This was not the way things were when everything started in 2007, but it is the way things exist now. So we will get a tip when the person comes in to fill out the form. And what are some of the indicators? Well, somebody comes in and there's a second person with them. And the second person that's with them is the one that's asking all the questions about the specifics of the gun. Or the second person with them is standing 2 aisles back and hands them the cash and it's all caught on video. They're pretty obvious indicators. That other person is the person that drove them there. Or the person that's filling out the paperwork is obviously high. We see a lot of our store purchasers aren't just family members, they're also addicts. So we receive the call once they fill out the paperwork. Well, we have 48 hours of which we would set up a surveillance. And we know the car we're looking for, we know the people that we're looking for, so we sit and we wait. So in addition to any of the footage that we would have inside the gun stores, we also have the surveillance. And we have the people that are followed back to the neighborhood. So that's just one way of which we prosecute straw cases. A second way is that we have our task force receives a property receipt. Now, what evidence is recovered in Philadelphia? It's placed on what's called a property receipt. On that piece of paper is described what evidence is recovered down to the serial number of the gun. Those pieces of paper are handed to our agents. I do have agents that sit with me in cubicles all in a row, but I also have agents that sit in the detective divisions themselves. So every morning when they come in, they'll have a stack of paperwork for the guns that were recovered the night before. It is their job to run on those guns, to see who the original owners of those guns were, and then to investigate the owners themselves. You will find a defendant has purchased 9 guns in 2 months. You go to the defendant's house, you ask the defendant where the 9 guns are, they can't come up with any of them.
By definition, these are people who do not have a record, and people, because if you have a record, you can't purchase a gun legally. We have found, at least in Pennsylvania, they are very willing to give statements. They are very willing to talk about what happened. I believe it's naivety, or I like to think that we have really good investigators who've been doing this for probably 30 to 40 years. But most of our cases are statement cases. And then from there, you trace the gun forward. There are a couple of interesting cases that we've had, just two of which I want to talk to you about. One of which is Jose Cruz. A gun was recovered in a Philly Police Department narcotics raid. Agents traced the gun back to Jose Cruz. After further database search into Jose Cruz, it was discovered he had purchased 8 other guns. He admitted to strawing 8 of the 9 to drug dealers because he was a drug addict. He open pled in court for us and received a sentence of 4 to 24 years. We have a gun show. I have a gun show case. This defendant's name is Kurt Kramer. He's with 2 other men. One goes up and tries to purchase a gun, gets immediately denied. My agents staff those gun shows. The 3 go into the bathroom. I happen to have an agent in the bathroom anyway. Here's the conversation that occurs, and the one defendant says to Kurt, "Will you buy the gun for me?" They go out to the car. Agent follows them out to the car. They see the guy, give Kurt money. Kurt walks back into the gun show. Kurt purchases four guns, comes out with the guns, and we stop the car and recover the guns. So those are 2 of the highlights of some of the cases that we work on pretty successfully with everybody else. But we don't have the issues in Pennsylvania statutorily, I think, and the hurdles that you guys experience here in Maryland. So, I'm sorry, in closing, let me just look at my notes real quick. I'm just going over. It was a great thought, and now it's gone. So I'm pretty sure that's all I got for you.
Thank you very much. I was able to go and do a site visit not long after the unit was set up, and I was so impressed particularly with your investigators, your former homicide team. Really amazing people. I want to give Sergeant Frank Lopez an opportunity. He works for the Maryland State Police's Gun Center, to take just a few minutes to see whether he would like to work for the Philadelphia DA. No, sorry. To see whether...
We have a much better secondhand property database and investigation than Philly, just saying. We've been
No, Sergeant Lopez. So we've heard some on the regulatory side. We've heard some of the challenges from Ms. Campbell. Is there anything you want to add to some of the work that your team does to try to work these cases, and what you see again, if there are unique challenges or opportunities you think we could do better with?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate that, and I'm happy that Philadelphia has the success. That's really good. And we're hoping to have the same types of successes here in the state of Maryland. So I have probably one of the best jobs in the state police and in the state of Maryland. I get to run the Maryland Gun Center. And it's pretty cool because it's a brand new enforcement initiative, and talking about opportunities, we're taking the opportunity with the Gun Center to hold gun offenders accountable, which is the goal here. I have a staff of 7 investigators, experienced criminal investigators who specialize in firearms enforcement. And then I have 2 assistant attorney general investigators who are retired Baltimore City officers who assist the Gun Center as well. So what is the Gun Center? Let me go back. Why was the Gun Center created? It's to get the upper hand on the criminal, okay? And how is that done? To be able to give good information to the street officer and the prosecutor so they can successfully investigate these gun crimes and then prosecute them. So what happens is it's a 24/7 operation. An officer will make a gun arrest out on the street, either a handgun on a person, handgun in a vehicle, or during a search warrant. These are the type of calls that we receive at the Gun Center. And then we do the background check on the suspect or suspects. And we ask all the pertinent questions to ensure that somebody doesn't get off, obviously, from the charges. We have a complex laws here in the state of Maryland, and we're trying to ensure that they're properly utilized. So we'll run a background check on a suspect, and then we'll determine whether they are prohibited or not. If they are, we inform the officer, as well as the prosecutor in most jurisdictions, that the person is prohibited and the reason for the prohibition or disqualification. So we'll put in the record, they were convicted of robbery in Baltimore City Circuit Court on this date, and here's the case number. And then what we do is we recommend specific gun charges. We also run the gun. So we were talking earlier about regulated firearms versus non-regulated firearms. In Maryland, we regulate certain types of firearms, okay? So pistols, revolvers, and there's 45 enumerated what is classified as assault weapons, okay? As well as assault pistols. Those are all regulated firearms. We check those firearms if they're seized against our database to see if there's any unlawful sale or transfer of a firearm. We also check to see if the firearm has been reported stolen. And then we shoot that all back in an email to the officer and the prosecutor, so they are able to make an informed decision out on the street and prior to prosecution. So they have all that information up front. It is a wonderful resource. I'm very blessed and lucky to be able to run this unit because we do a lot to help the officer and the prosecutor on the street. So we started last year, and last year we had 2,828 cases. This year we're over 4,200, and we're not even done. Now, what a lot of people don't know is cops out on the street, they're not going to call if they don't trust you. And I can't begin to tell you how important it is that we've had that much of an increase in calls. That means that the street cop says, I know what they're doing, I trust what they're doing, and I know that these people are going to be held accountable. And I'll give you a few specific instances. I had an opportunity to go to the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office to introduce myself to the new Zone 1 chief. And while I was waiting in the lobby, a detective who I recognized the name of, who has called the gun center, walked in, and I took that opportunity to introduce myself. And a detective said, "Hey, Sarge, it was really great to meet you. Thank you so much for what you and your guys do for us." And you could really see the sincerity, the appreciation of the information that we provide to them. He goes, "There's two big things that I've noticed." This is the detective speaking. "We now know for a fact whether someone's prohibited or not. And that is so important for prosecution purposes, okay? Everybody knows that murder, robbery, rape, those felonies, those are prohibitors. But there's so many other things that prohibit people from possessing firearms, and we're able to give them that information." The other thing that he said was, hey, now these people are being held without bail, or the bail's too high and they can't get out. So before, a person would just be arrested for handgun in vehicle, and they would be released on their own recognizance. Or they would have a really small bail, and they'd be back out on the street committing crimes again. Okay? Well, now they're being held. And I think that that is a huge, huge positive thing that the gun center has been able to do, because now commissioners are looking at these crimes that were recommended to be charged. Felon in possession of a firearm with a felony conviction. That is a 5-year minimum, okay? What that means is you have to serve an automatic 5 years without parole. A lot of people don't want to plead to that type of a crime, okay? So I've also had the opportunity to put on training, and I've gotten the same feedback from the Prince George's County Police Department, another jurisdiction that has high gun crime volume. And the detectives told me during the training that they've noticed the same thing. It's clear that the people are being held at a high bond or they're not being released. Now, we're able to share information, which is probably the most important thing in policing. Cops love to share information. So let me give you one of our success stories. Baltimore City police officers got a lookout for a carjacking suspect. And they're driving towards this vehicle without the headlights on, and they see it, so they turned around and matched the description of the vehicle they were looking for. They tried to stop the vehicle took off, and it wrecked, it overturned. Well, they were able to get to the scene, and as they arrived on the scene, they saw the subject hanging from the car, and there was a gun right underneath them. So they were able to apprehend the suspect and take the gun, and they called the gun center. Well, this gentleman was prohibited, but what was great about the whole situation, not about the crash or him having a gun, but is the information involving what we were able to give them. We ended up finding out that the gun came back to a resident of Howard County. Okay, well, we ran that resident. We checked to see the gun was still legally registered to them. So we, through our investigation, through the databases we checked, we were able to determine that that individual had his home burglarized, but did not have the serial number of the firearm to provide to the local police department. Okay? So we were able to possibly close a burglary because the subject that was arrested lived 2 doors down from the person who owned that gun. That is a true success story. That was probably the person who committed that burglary. So there's a lot of things that need to be done for a gun case. One, you have to properly identify the firearm. You have to make sure that the person is either prohibited or not. You have to be able to prove in court that the person was prohibited. How do you do that? You have to get a certified copy of the prohibiting offense. These things that I've described are one of many things that the Gun Center does, and we think it's a huge success. This year, we've ran so far over 4,000 suspects and 2,700 guns, and we've also traced about over 900 firearms.
Great. Thank you very much, Sergeant Lopez. It's now my honor to introduce Brian Frosh. Senator Frosh has served in the Maryland State Senate since 1995, where he's held numerous leadership positions, including chairing the Judicial Proceedings Committee since 2003. He has too many awards for me to list them all, but I was struck by how many are connected to the things that we work on in this school. Legislator of the Year from Maryland Public Health Association, Children's Health Advocate of the Year, Champion of Traffic Safety, and Legislator of the Year from Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police. And then last but not least, Biker of the Year from the Montgomery County Department of Public Works and Transportation. Brian has served with such distinction and is held in such high regard for his work, and to no one's surprise was elected to be Maryland's next Attorney General, where we're very excited for his new leadership. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I'm honored to be here. First, I want to thank the Bloomberg School of Public Health and Daniel. We went through quite an ordeal last year in the General Assembly to pass the Firearms Safety Act. And what we did essentially was pick best practices from around the country and adopt those. And where we got them was from Daniel Webster, the School of Public Health, and of course the leadership of the indefatigable Vinnie DeMarco. Thank you very much, Vinnie. I asked Daniel when he asked me to be here, and again this morning, what do you want me to say? And he said, oh, don't worry, you're going last, you just be the cleanup. And sitting at this table with these 3 very impressive women, and Frank, I'm not sure there's much to clean up. They do a great job, and I'm proud to be on a panel with them. But let me just give you some stray thoughts about gun policy and enforcement of our gun laws. As I said, what we did with the Firearms Safety Act was look for the most effective tools from across the country, and I think we got them. We ban assault weapons, we limit the capacity of gun magazines, we require the fingerprint licensing for purchases of handguns. And as has been much discussed, that is designed to cut out straw purchasers. We don't have as good a tool in Maryland as they do in Pennsylvania for convicting people when they act as a straw purchaser for somebody who owns a firearm. But the fingerprint requirement, we believe, will act as a deterrent to stop people from doing that. The states around the country, or the states that are most similar to Maryland that have adopted that requirement, have, as Daniel's slides showed, lower rates of gun violence, lower rates of gun deaths than does Maryland. So in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Hawaii, which I guess you could argue is not demographically similar to Maryland, they have lower rates of gun violence and gun deaths because they require somebody to give his or her fingerprints before they can purchase a handgun. I don't think that Daniel or anybody else has figured out quite why that works, but we have a pretty good theory, and that is that if you're a disqualified individual because you've committed a felony or for whatever reason, but you got a friend, a girlfriend maybe, who has a clean record, and you say to her, hey, sweetie, here's $700, go buy me a gun. She may be willing to do it, but if she's got $700, but first has to go to the state police and give her fingerprints, she may love this guy, but not quite enough to do that. And that's why we think, at least, that it is an effective deterrent. There is another challenge in Maryland law that I don't think anybody has mentioned yet today that's really quite important. I don't think anybody in the country has found an adequate solution for this, and that is the havoc that individuals with mental illness have caused when they have access to firearms. And I think if you look at the mass killings that have gone on around the country, in almost every single instance, the individual who has been the perpetrator has some form of mental illness. We struggle with that. I don't think that's probably a small percentage of the homicides with firearms that occurs in our country, but an important one. And we struggled with what to do about that when we were passing the Firearm Safety Act. Before we passed the law, our requirements were sort of random. I mean, it said if you were an habitual drunkard or a drug addict, you were prohibited from owning a firearm. We moved in the direction of broadening the definition, but I don't think we really got there. What we did was we said that anybody who has been involuntarily committed to a mental health facility would be disqualified. When it passed the Senate, we had a provision that said if you were involuntarily committed or if you were voluntarily committed after being the subject of a petition to be committed, but agreed yourself, voluntarily went in, you were disqualified. And we created a mechanism so that folks who suffered from a temporary mental illness could re-qualify if their physicians felt that gun ownership was appropriate for them down the road. I don't think, and that provision was taken out in the House of Delegates, and I'm not sure that that's adequate either. I'm not sure that anybody in the country has found precisely the right formulation, but one that strikes me as worthy of conversation is one in which we say somebody who has been diagnosed as psychotic and who is non-compliant, namely that somebody has a diagnosis of psychosis, is prescribed medication and is not taking it. I'm pretty sure that those people should not have firearms. It overlays a political issue that's extremely difficult and touchy, and that is, well, two actually. One, are we going to be searching for people who suffer from mental illness, and will that deter them from seeking help? And the other is, how are we going to find out when somebody is non-compliant? Are we going to require their healthcare practitioner to turn them in? So there are civil liberties issues, I think, that are attendant to that question that are difficult to resolve, and then the issue of what we're going to require of healthcare practitioners in enforcing it. But it's a serious problem. I don't think it's been adequately addressed in Maryland law. Each one of the other individuals on this panel has been a law enforcer, and I've been only a policymaker. I'm now putting on a different hat. I'm looking forward to that very much, especially looking forward to working with Kathleen Campbell in that role. I think we're going to leave some time for questions, and so let me just say that thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here. I look forward to your questions.
Okay.
Thank you very much. So we have a lot of expertise, not only up here, but a lot of expertise out there as well as just good questions or comments. So we have someone, Eric and John Speed, have mics. We'd appreciate if you could use the mic. There's a gentleman with the white cap here.
Delegate Kurt Anderson.
Delegate Anderson.
Okay. Delegate Anderson, okay.
Yeah, good afternoon. And thanks for putting this together. I think it's been really informative. And when I heard that Brian was going to be here, I wanted to come and also get his take on, Attorney General-elect Frosh, his take on some of this. And I just wanted to raise one concern I have, and I know Vinny is going to cringe with regard to this, but we did do a very comprehensive Firearm Safety Act last year, and we still have probably another year or two to see what the results of it would be in terms of diminishing or at least reducing the acts of crime or violence in the state of Maryland. And I was hoping that part of this symposium today would be also, in addition to trying to keep guns away from criminals, what else can we do to make sure that criminals don't even want to use guns in terms of crime?
Sure.
In other words, a criminal, regardless of how many laws we passed, will still probably be able to get a gun. Teenagers who want to drink can still get alcohol. Drug addicts who want to use drugs can still get drugs. And I think as hard as we work, and Brian, I know you and I have worked very hard on this. I was sponsor of the bill to increase the penalties to 15 years, that criminals will still be able to get guns. And I hope that, and I want to ask you if policy-wise, should we not also spend as much time on trying to reduce the underlying reasons why people want to get guns in the first place? Are they not educated well enough to be part of American society? Are they poor and resort to crime? The mental illness question is definitely part of it. But in Baltimore City, even if we keep guns out of the hands of criminals by 20%, and we knock the murder rate down by 20%, that's still going to be 160 people murdered every year with handguns. And I just wanted you as a former policymaker, now still a policymaker, I think, to answer the question as to whether or not we can move this argument toward removing the reason why people even need guns in the first place. Because if they don't need them, they're not going to want to go get them. And I think that if they want to get them, they'll always be available.
A couple of thoughts. First, let me say Kurt has been a leader on all these issues in the House of Delegates for several decades. I think we have a public health problem in the United States of America, and it's why we're here. It's why we're here is a symptom of it. I mean, there are 310 million guns in private hands in the United States. People aren't using them for hunting for the most part. They're not using them for self-defense for the most part. They're sitting idle, thankfully, most of the time. But the fact that there are that many guns in private hands causes all kinds of problems. The NRA lobbied successfully in Congress for years to stop the flow of information about handgun use and handgun violence, or gun use and gun violence, so that we don't have, Daniel and folks like him who are studying this don't have some of the information that they need. But a study that, the last study that I saw, that I think was from the 1990s, showed that if you have a gun in your home, you're 3 times more likely to experience a homicide than if you don't. You're 5 times more likely to experience a suicide. And so the mere presence of guns is dangerous. While we were debating the Firearm Safety Act on the Senate floor, and it went on for quite a long time, but that's in legislative terms. It went on for, I think, 4 or 5 days. But during that period, there were 2 gun deaths in Maryland. I think they were both in Baltimore City. They were accidents. One of them was a guy who was cleaning his gun, and he forgot that there was a round in the chamber. It went off while he was cleaning. It went through the floor. It killed a man who was sleeping on a sofa underneath him. And so, I mean, just having a gun in your house is dangerous. That's not even when your kid is out looking for it or discovers it by accident and playfully pulls the trigger. We have, the Second Amendment guarantees people the right to own guns, and the Supreme Court has carried that much further than I would think was either the original intent of the framers of the Constitution or any reasonable reading of the Constitution today. But it's the law of the land, and it's very difficult to craft solutions to solve the problems that having that many guns in society causes. We got to play the cards we're dealt, and I think the Firearm Safety Act was a really good attempt at reducing gun violence. I think it'll be successful, but it's not going to wipe it out.
So I'm just going to take a very quick response to the question and give other opportunities for other questions and comments. But there are very important evidence-based law enforcement strategies to reduce, to make it riskier to illegally possess guns. They've been shown to work very consistently, and those can and should be adopted. I think that's part of Baltimore's strategy, for example. There are also effective public health-oriented strategies that are focusing on changing norms about using guns in response to conflicts and provocations, and to mediate conflicts, particularly those between gangs. We've studied those and found when implemented well, they actually have a pretty profound effect in reducing homicides and non-fatal shootings. So there are effective tools to address that. So I don't think we should be too pessimistic that we can't have a pretty important impact on this problem, despite some of the things that Brian was saying.
I'm thinking about the slide from the presentation at the beginning that said 80% of gun acquisitions are from family, friend, or the underground market. I know it's hard to collect data on those type of gun acquisitions, but I'm just curious about speculation as to how those guns get to those people that then give it to criminals. And are gun dealers a significant player in those acquisitions at some point down the road?
Right. Great question. This is a really challenging thing to study. That's something we've been trying to get our hands around for a number of years. We recently received some funding from the Rave Foundation to conduct a pretty comprehensive study of Baltimore's underground gun market. There are similar studies that are underway now in Chicago, Boston, and LA. So really there's a lot of dots to connect here. I can tell you just in terms of, you mentioned the degree to which the licensed gun dealer might play a role here. I can tell you that with incredible consistency, when there have been very focused efforts to address problematic dealers through undercover stings, through better regulations, very consistently you see a reduction in the diversion of guns to criminals. So they do play a role, and I think successful oversight, keeping them on their toes, is one, not the only thing to reduce diversion, but certainly should be part of it.
Can I just address that? Just
Sure.
anecdotally, because I'm not an academic. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about how to target gun trafficking, and our unit has really just begun to do some proactive investigations, and we've done a bunch of debriefings. And it may be as simple as one group has one gun, but it's different than a pack of crack. A pack of crack, you sell that packet, and that packet is done. A gun lives for a very long time, and one weapon could be connected to 3 non-fatal shootings and 1 homicide. So it's a different animal, and it is passed from person to person, from friend to friend. I mean, there's a group in Philadelphia where we know this from intelligence, not from evidence, but the gang rents guns, and that's how they make their money. And they rent you a gun for 48 hours, and they charge you $200. And their leverage over you is that they know you went and committed a crime with it, right? But they're a very successful group of people, and that's their entire livelihood. So it's a very different problem to attack on the street level, at least in an inner city, which is very different than from the suburbs where you have, a son who may go into the father's closet and grab a gun, which we don't at least see in Philadelphia.
And I would say on behalf of the gun dealers as well, right? That's the legitimate, that's where the supply goes, right? So that's who has the most. And so we can track those, and so that's where they are. They are a critical link. They are not the link, right? They are not the only link. And before coming over to licensing division, I was responsible for implementing the state's secondhand reporting of secondary sales of anything, right? So jewelry, junk, scrap, your catalytic converters off your cars, your rings, whatever. The delegate mentioned this, and he's right. It's going to take us a few years. Just like pawn dealers, pawn shop would never talk to a police officer until they started realizing that they really are here to weed out the bad guys. In Maryland, we have very legitimate, very honorable and ethical business people, and they simply don't want the bad actors in their industry. But they feel like they're by themselves, no different than the lady who is stuck in the neighborhood where all the crime is, and you got to find a way to get her to talk to you. So as we build rapport and education, we're going to find out, because they're going to tell us. They will tell us who the bad actors are, and we can't do it alone. It's just that simple. It really takes time to build this rapport and to stay committed and dedicated.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? Just one in the back.
And on a federal level, how do you see gun enforcement changing? Do you think that gun laws are going to become more strict or more lax or target certain people?
So just to clarify the question, is the question whether we think laws will get stricter or enforcement will change?
Whether laws will get stricter.
I can take a crack at that real quickly. Based on the last election, it's actually sort of an interesting thing to look at. Generally, the Republicans did obviously extremely well, and that party has not embraced stronger gun laws by any means. On the other hand, a very specific ballot measure in the state of Washington for comprehensive background checks passed overwhelmingly, even when they also were voting in more Republicans. So, and then the other thing worth noting is that there were key lawmakers who took important steps in strengthening our laws in Colorado and Connecticut, who won re-election. And so the one trend that we're seeing in the most positive direction in terms of stronger laws very consistently, and it's very interesting, it doesn't matter if the state is blue, red, or purple, greater protections for victims of domestic violence, a lot better laws, strengthening some of the loopholes that had been there in a lot of states. I think people have recognized that politicians, it may be hard to get women's vote if you don't act to protect victims of domestic violence. Brian, do you have any other thoughts about that?
Well, I would just say, in Maryland, I think it's really unlikely that you'll see any major changes. Obviously, I don't think that Governor-elect Hogan is going to be leading the charge, but regardless of who the governor is, when you have a major change as we did last year, and it was really quite sweeping, it takes a number of years, maybe 10, before the legislature has the interest or will to re-engage and try to make additional changes, or is able to do it successfully. So I think we're going to be waiting a while, watching how the Firearms Safety Act works, and I'm very optimistic that it'll promote safety. And it's going to be a few years before the General Assembly takes another major initiative.
I think we have time for one more question. There's a gentleman in the back.
Thanks for coming. I'm a first-year public policy student here, and I also live with the Baltimore City Police. And we talk all the time about people that he sees in the community that don't know many of the new regulations and policies that are being enforced. And, shocking, it seems like they're very successful, but could be even more successful if it was disseminated more throughout the community. So who bears that responsibility, and what other things are being done to more effectively communicate these laws to people?
Just very briefly, I think you hit on an incredibly important issue, and it's sort of central to what in my world we refer to as focused deterrence, something popularized by criminologist David Kennedy, where he has seen in his own work and what the research bears out is that what is very critical to having that powerful deterrent effect is very direct communications with the individuals most directly affected. I'm happy to say that David Kennedy's program, the ceasefire program, is active in Baltimore. It's been in the Western District in recent months and appears to really have had a very beneficial effect in reducing gun violence there. In the coming year, they will move to East Baltimore. So that is clearly part of a fundamental aspect of that strategy, but I think you raise an important point that it really should be sort of across the board, sort of ingrained into how we do this work, that we don't simply want to catch people breaking the law. We want them not to break the law, right? That's sort of fundamental to how public health folks think about this, and I think more broadly in law enforcement and criminal justice.
And I would say that it's all of our responsibility. And picking up what Mr. Webster said, we all identified our stakeholders. And it is our responsibility to reach out to them and make sure each of them closer to us knows exactly what their role is. That's what the Gun Center does for law enforcement. I think what Sergeant Lopez was saying, not only will a police officer not call you if he doesn't trust you, none of them will enforce a law that they're not 100% confident that they know what they're doing. Think about it. I went to college, I finished UMBC, I graduated, I got a graduate degree, I went to the police academy, and the day they said, here's your gun, here's your badge, I was in a car by myself. I'm like, are you kidding? Holy crap, I could talk to anybody, but what happens if somebody commits a crime? What am I gonna do? So he convinces them, and you only have to do it once. Once you've done it, and we do everything by template, right? Believe me, I have the first police report I ever wrote, because I just copied it and we didn't cut and paste then, we wrote and erased, but now we can cut and paste. That is the key to this. And the more we do this, and we do this well, in the 5 or 10 years, we'll know it as well as troopers know traffic law.
One final comment I want to make actually about the work that Lauren is leading in Philadelphia, that really what I've found very refreshing and important is that in addition to taking action and prosecuting straw purchasers and people breaking firearm laws, you let the public know about it. There are regular events in which they'll say, these are the large numbers of individuals we prosecute. This is a serious crime. Unfortunately, I don't know that message has come through in Maryland. So part of reason I'm so glad that Lauren came is that I hope that we can start to send that kind of powerful message in Maryland, and I'm confident with a lot of the expertise and leadership on this panel that will move forward. So I want to thank again our panelists and everyone here for coming. I think this has been really a great forum. Thank you.